My husband, 37M, said if I 35F wanted stability, I had to make it happen myself. So I did, by leaving him 7 years ago, and now, I'm 42, happier than ever, with a new career, real love, and the community I built. But let me tell you how we got here, because this story isn't just about leaving someone, it's about finding yourself in the wreckage of what you thought was your life. 7 years ago, I was 35 and drowning. Not literally, but emotionally, spiritually, in every way that mattered. I was married to a man who had this incredible ability to make me feel like everything wrong in our relationship was my fault. Every argument, every moment of tension, every time I felt lonely or unsupported, it all came back to me not trying hard enough. When I would bring up concerns about our future, about feeling disconnected, about wanting more stability in our marriage, he would look at me with this expression that made me feel small. Then he would say those words that still echo in my head sometimes. If you want stability in our life, you have to make it happen. At first, I thought he was challenging me to be better. I thought he was pushing me to grow, so I threw myself into trying to fix everything. I planned date nights that he would cancel. I suggested couples therapy that he would dismiss. I worked harder at my job, thinking maybe if I brought in more money, he would feel less stressed and more present. I cleaned the house until it sparkled, cooked elaborate meals, and tried to become the perfect wife. But nothing I did was ever enough. The goalpost kept moving. Every time I thought I had created the stability he was talking about, he would find new ways to point out what was still wrong. It was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. I remember one particular night when everything crystallized for me. We had been married for 8 years at that point, and I was sitting in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. He was downstairs watching television, and I realized that even though we lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, and shared the same last name, we were strangers. That night, I started thinking about my childhood. I grew up in a house where love was conditional, where my parents' approval depended on how well I performed, how little trouble I caused, how perfectly I could anticipate their needs. I learned early that my worth was tied to what I could do for other people, not who I was as a person. Lying there in the dark, I realized I had married someone who operated the same way. My husband didn't see me as a partner or an equal. He saw me as someone whose job it was to make his life easier, more comfortable, more stable. And when I couldn't deliver on that impossible standard, it was my failing, not his. The next morning, I made a decision that terrified me. I was going to start looking for an apartment. Not because I was definitely leaving, I wasn't ready to admit that yet, but because I needed to know I had options. I needed to know that if things didn't change, I could change them myself. Finding that apartment was like stepping into a different universe. It was small, nothing fancy, but it was mine. The landlord didn't care about my marriage problems or whether I was making the right decision. He just wanted to know if I could pay rent on time. That simple, transactional relationship felt like freedom. I signed the lease but didn't move in right away. For weeks, I carried the key in my pocket like a talisman. Just knowing it was there gave me strength I didn't know I had. I started seeing myself differently. Instead of a woman who was failing at marriage, I began to see someone who was brave enough to have a backup plan. Around this time, my husband announced he was going away for a long weekend with his friends. In the past, I would have felt abandoned and spent the whole time he was gone feeling sorry for myself. But this time, something shifted. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. That weekend alone in our house changed everything. I could eat what I wanted without judgment. I could watch whatever I wanted on television without negotiating. I could go to bed when I was tired and wake up when I was ready. I could exist without constantly monitoring someone else's mood or trying to anticipate their needs. For the first time in years, I felt like myself. Not someone's wife, not someone's caretaker, not someone's disappointment. Just me. And I liked who I was when I wasn't trying to be what someone else needed. When he came home from his trip, he seemed different too. Distant. Cold. He barely looked at me when he walked through the door, and when I asked how his weekend was, he gave me one-word answers. It was like he could sense that something had shifted in me, and he didn't like it. That's when I knew I had to leave. Not because of what he did or didn't do that weekend, but because of how I felt when he wasn't there. I had tasted freedom, and I couldn't go back to the cage. The conversation where I told him I was leaving was surreal. He sat there looking at me like I was speaking a foreign language. I think he genuinely believed that I would never actually go through with it. That I was too scared, too dependent, too invested in keeping our life together to walk away. When I handed him the separation papers, he didn't get angry. He didn't fight for me or beg me to stay. He just looked annoyed, like I was creating an inconvenience for him. Even in that moment, he managed to make me feel like I was the problem. The first few months of separation were the hardest. Not because I missed him. I was surprised by how much I didn't, but because I was learning how to be alone. I had gone from my parents' house to college, to living with boyfriends, to marriage. I had never just been by myself. My little apartment felt enormous and tiny at the same time. Some nights I would lie awake, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window, feeling simultaneously free and terrified. I had to learn how to make decisions without consulting anyone else. I had to learn how to trust my own judgment. But slowly, something beautiful started happening. I began to remember who I was before I became someone's wife. I remembered that I loved art and had always wanted to paint. I bought supplies and set up a little studio in my spare bedroom. I wasn't good at it, but I didn't care. It was mine. I started going to a coffee shop down the street every morning before work. At first, I was just another customer, but after a few weeks, the barista started remembering my order. Then we started making small talk. Then I started recognizing other regulars. Before I knew it, I had accidentally built a little community. The divorce process was brutal. My husband, who had been relatively civil during the separation, turned into someone I barely recognized. He fought me on everything. The house, the savings account, even furniture that I had bought with my own money. It was like he was punishing me for having the audacity to leave him. His lawyer painted me as unstable, selfish, a woman who was throwing away a good marriage on a whim. There were moments during depositions when I questioned everything. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe I was throwing away something that could have been fixed. But then I would go home to my little apartment, make myself dinner, and remember what peace felt like. I would remember that weekend when he was gone, and how light I felt, without the constant weight of his dissatisfaction pressing down on me. The day our divorce was finalized, I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. Not because I regretted my decision, but because I was mourning the version of myself who had stayed in that marriage for so long. I was grieving the years I had spent trying to be someone else's idea of perfect instead of being myself. But that grief didn't last long. Within a few months, I started to feel something I had never experienced before: genuine happiness. Not the desperate, performative happiness I had tried to create in my marriage, but real, sustainable joy. I threw myself into building the life I wanted. I went back to school to get my master's degree in social work. I had always wanted to help people, but in my marriage, I had been too focused on trying to fix my own problems to think about anyone else's. School was challenging in ways I hadn't expected, not just academically, but emotionally. I was learning about trauma, about patterns of abuse, about codependency. I was learning that the way I had been treated wasn't normal or acceptable. I was learning that I deserved better. My professors became mentors. My classmates became friends. I was building a network of people who knew me as a student, as someone with goals and dreams and opinions, not as someone's wife or someone's problem. During my second year of school, I met David. He was in my research methods class, and he was everything my ex-husband wasn't. He was kind without being condescending. He was supportive without being controlling. He listened to me talk about my dreams, and never once suggested they were unrealistic. Our first date was at a museum. We spent 3 hours looking at paintings and talking about everything and nothing. When he walked me to my car, he asked if he could see me again. Not in a demanding way, but like he was genuinely hoping I would say yes. Falling in love with David was terrifying, not because he was scary, but because I had to learn how to be vulnerable again. I had to learn how to trust someone with my heart after it had been broken so thoroughly. The first time he said he loved me, I panicked. I made excuses and avoided his calls for 3 days. Not because I didn't love him back. I did, but because I was terrified of giving someone that kind of power over me again. But David was patient. He didn't pressure me or make me feel guilty for being scared. He just kept showing up, kept being consistent, kept proving that not all men were like my ex-husband. When I finally said I loved him too, it felt like coming home. Not to a place, but to myself. To the version of myself who was capable of love without fear, who could be vulnerable without being weak. Around this time, I started therapy. I know it sounds backwards. Most people go to therapy during their divorce, not years later, but I wasn't ready before. I had been so focused on surviving, on building a new life, that I hadn't had time to process what had happened to me. My therapist helped me understand that my marriage hadn't just been unhappy, it had been emotionally abusive. She helped me see the patterns, the ways my ex-husband had undermined my confidence, isolated me from friends, and made me doubt my own perceptions. Understanding this was both liberating and devastating. Liberating because it meant I hadn't been crazy or oversensitive. Devastating because it meant I had wasted so many years of my life trying to fix something that was never going to be fixed. But therapy also helped me understand my own role in what had happened. Not that I was to blame for the abuse, but that I had learned patterns in childhood that made me vulnerable to it. I had learned to equate love with self-sacrifice, to believe that my worth was tied to how well I could serve others. Unlearning those patterns was like learning to walk again. I had to consciously practice setting boundaries, saying no, asking for what I needed. I had to learn that loving someone didn't mean disappearing into them. By the time I graduated with my master's degree, I felt like a completely different person. Not just because I had a new career or a new relationship, but because I had a new understanding of who I was and what I deserved. I got a job at a non-profit organization that provides services to domestic violence survivors. The work was hard, emotionally draining, but it was also incredibly meaningful. I was using my own experience to help other women who were where I had been. Every time I sat across from a client who was afraid to leave her abuser, I saw myself 7 years earlier. Every time I helped someone develop a safety plan or find emergency housing, I remembered my own terror and relief when I signed the lease on my first apartment. The work gave me purpose in a way that my old job never had. I wasn't just earning money anymore. I was making a difference. I was helping women discover their own strength, their own worth, their own ability to create the lives they wanted. David and I moved in together after 2 years of dating. I was nervous about it. My last experience with cohabitation had been such a disaster, but it turned out to be wonderful. We created a home together, not just a place to live, but a space that reflected both of our personalities and dreams. He never tried to change me or control me. He celebrated my independence instead of feeling threatened by it. When I needed space, he gave it to me. When I needed support, he provided it. He made me feel like I was enough, just as I was. 3 years after we moved in together, David proposed. I said yes immediately, without the fear and doubt I had expected to feel. This time, I was choosing marriage from a place of strength, not desperation. I was choosing to share my life with someone who enhanced it rather than diminished it. Our wedding was small but perfect. We were surrounded by the community I had built over the years. Friends from school, colleagues from work, neighbors who had become family. My ex-husband wasn't there, obviously, but I didn't miss him. That chapter of my life was closed. Looking back now, I can see how every difficult moment led me to where I am today. The loneliness in my first marriage taught me to value genuine connection. The fear of being alone taught me to enjoy my own company. The financial stress of divorce taught me to be self-reliant. I'm 42 now, and I wake up every morning grateful for the life I've built. Not because it's perfect. No life is, but because it's mine. I chose it. I created it. And I continue to shape it every day. My work continues to be challenging and rewarding. I've been promoted twice and now supervise a team of social workers. I love mentoring younger staff members, helping them develop their skills and find their passion for the work. David and I have been married for 2 years now, and our relationship continues to grow stronger. We've talked about having children, and we're trying now. The thought of raising a child with someone who is truly my partner, who respects and supports me, fills me with joy. I still live in the same neighborhood where I moved after my divorce. I know my neighbors, my barista, the woman who runs the flower shop on the corner. I have roots here, connections that make me feel like I belong. Sometimes I run into people who knew me when I was married to my ex-husband. They always want to know if I'm happy, if I regret leaving, if I ever wonder what would have happened if I had stayed. The answer is always the same. I've never been happier. I don't regret anything, and I know exactly what would have happened if I had stayed. I would have disappeared completely. My ex-husband remarried about 3 years ago. I heard about it through mutual friends, and I felt nothing but relief for his new wife. I hoped she was stronger than I had been, better able to maintain her identity in the face of his need to control. I never tried to contact him or maintain any kind of relationship. There was nothing left to say. He had made it clear during our divorce that he saw me as a traitor, someone who had betrayed him by refusing to keep sacrificing myself for his comfort. The woman I am now would never have married the man I divorced. The woman I am now would have seen the red flags, trusted her instincts, and walked away before wasting 8 years of her life. But I try not to have regrets. That younger version of myself was doing the best she could with the tools she had. If I could go back and talk to her, to the 35-year-old woman who was sitting in her bedroom 7 years ago, feeling trapped and hopeless, I would tell her what I wish someone had told me. You are not responsible for anyone else's happiness. You cannot love someone enough to fix them. You deserve to be with someone who sees your worth, not someone who makes you prove it every day. I would tell her that leaving is not giving up. It's choosing yourself. That stability isn't something someone else can give you. It's something you build for yourself, with your own hands and your own choices. I would tell her that the life waiting for her on the other side of fear is more beautiful than anything she can imagine, that she is braver than she knows, stronger than she feels, and worthy of love that doesn't require her to disappear. Most of all, I would tell her to trust her gut. It's been screaming at her for years, trying to tell her what she needs to know. She just needs to be brave enough to listen. 7 years later, I am living proof that it's never too late to start over, that happiness is not a luxury, but a choice, that you can build a life that feels authentic and meaningful, even if it means walking away from everything you thought you wanted. My husband was right about one thing. If I wanted stability in our life, I had to make it happen myself. He just never imagined that the stability I would create would be a life without him in it. And that's exactly what makes it so beautiful.